Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
Welcome. U.S. President George Bush confirmed that the U.S. forces, which traveled hundreds of miles to free the Iraqi people, will not be threatened by attacks by what he called a band of terrorists, adding that the U.S. will not be forced to retreat from Iraq before fulfilling its responsibilities.
Terrorists have a purpose.
The terrorists have a purpose, a strategy to their cruelty. They view the rise of democracy in Iraq as a powerful threat to their ambitions. In this, they are correct. They believe their acts of terror against our coalition, against international aid workers, and against innocent Iraqis will make us recoil and retreat. In this, they are mistaken. We did not charge hundreds of miles into the heart of Iraq and pay a bitter cost of casualties and liberate 25 million people only to retreat before a band of thugs and assassins.
Regarding the Palestinian issue, U.S. President George Bush warned Europe to join the United States and Israel by not working with Palestinian President Yasser Arafat in order to create a new Palestinian leadership. In a speech in London on the first day of his state visit to Britain, Bush said that the leaders of Europe should withdraw all support of any Palestinian ruler who fails his people and betrays their cause.
We seek a viable, independent state for the Palestinian people.
We seek a viable, independent state for the Palestinian people, who have been betrayed by others for too long. We seek security and recognition for the State of Israel, which has lived in the shadow of random death for too long. These are worthy goals in themselves. And by reaching them, we will also remove an occasion and excuse for hatred and violence in the broader Middle East. Achieving peace in the Holy Land is not just a matter of the shape of its border. As we work on the details of peace, we must look to the heart of the matter, which is the need for a viable Palestinian democracy.
An Egyptian delegation headed by Colonel Mohsen al-Noumani has arrived in Gaza to meet with Palestinian factions, to invite the representatives to participate in discussions in Cairo with the aim of reaching a new ceasefire. Earlier, Palestinian Prime Minister Ahmed Kureya held a series of meetings with nationalist and Islamic leaders to hear their opinions on the anticipated ceasefire.
In an effort to consult all Palestinian sides to come up with a single position, Prime Minister Ahmed Kureya arrived in Gaza to conduct meetings with nationalist and Islamic leaders to hear their opinions. The goal was to reach an agreement that represents the Palestinian national position on the ceasefire. At the Legislative Council, Abu Allah met with representatives from 5 Palestinian factions: the Fatah Movement, Hamas, Jihad, the Popular Front, and the Democratic Front, to debate the Palestinian position on the ceasefire issue without eliminating the right to resist, especially since talk about a ceasefire has not included any guarantees from Israel.
Our brother Abu Ala did not present any guarantees from any side. We said that resistance is the right of our people and the right of those who struggle for freedom. Brother Abu Ala, when you have specific issues, maybe we can sit and evaluate them. However, in principle, we must continue the resistance of our people and the intifada as long as there is occupation.
The Palestinian Prime Minister clarified that the goal of this meeting was to prepare for the inter-Palestinian dialogue in Cairo, confirming that there can be no talk of a ceasefire on their side in exchange for nothing. Rather, the Israeli side must also be committed.
There will be no ceasefire for nothing. We are talking about a mutual ceasefire with conditions. Our people are suffering and subjected to aggression. Everybody is demanding an end to that. That's the price for reaching ceasefire that would permit political negotiations to resume.
Hamas and Jihad confirmed that any new ceasefire must comply with different standards than the previous ceasefire agreement. Although there is understanding about the need to spare civilians the atrocities of war, the current situation does not allow for any new compromises.
We are prepared to relieve the civilians on both sides. from the cycle of this conflict if the Israeli enemy is committed to stop targeting Palestinian civilians. We must not present any compromises for nothing. The Palestinian situation now is firmer and stronger than from previous months. It is not necessary to offer any agreements for nothing and without any goals.
Meanwhile, an Egyptian delegation headed by Colonel Machine al-Numani arrived in Gaza to conduct discussions with the 5 factions and officially invite them for meetings in Cairo, which will begin after the Eid holiday. Earlier, Ahmed Kareh held talks with the representatives of the Palestinian factions with the aim of reaching a national agreement on a ceasefire. His meetings may be written as a success. However, the primary problem facing the possible ceasefire agreement is the Israeli position and the Hebrew state's questionable commitment.
Palestinian Prime Minister Ahmed Kareh arrived in Gaza on Wednesday to hold talks with Palestinian resistance factions on reaching a truce with Israel. Palestinians blamed its collapse on continued Israeli army aggressions. It will be Kareh's first attempt since his government took office last week to negotiate with Hamas, Islamic Jihad and some 13 other factions for an end to their operations. In a move apparently designed to improve relations with Hamas, official Palestinian sources revealed that they had reversed a decision to freeze bank accounts of charity organizations linked to the movement. Egyptian intelligence officials who helped broker a previous truce were also expected in Gaza Wednesday evening for talks with both Kareh and the Palestinian groups.
The Egyptian delegation headed by intelligence chief Omar Suleiman would try to persuade Palestinian factions to cement a new ceasefire truce during their meeting Wednesday night in the Gaza Strip. Hamas group said it would meet the envoy, though that it refused to commit itself to a ceasefire if Israel does not do the same. Palestinian factions had in June agreed to a ceasefire that was followed by intense Israeli aggressions.
We are not going to imitate a previous failed system or failed process without commitment to our national demand, without respond to our national demand. We are not going to give any single word concerning ceasefire. We have no alternative except self-defense, except effective armed struggle against the Israeli aggression till the elimination of occupation.
Israeli Foreign Minister Sylvan Shalom had said in Brussels that a truce in itself did not constitute a solution. This was followed by ground attacks on Palestinian cities. Occupation forces stormed at night into Jenin in the West Bank and clashed with Palestinian resistance fighters. Several Palestinian civilians were injured. Other fighters had opened machine gun fire at Surda checkpoint in Ramallah. The occupation forces said that one Israeli soldier was injured in the attack. The occupation had also destroyed a house last night in Rafah in southern Gaza Strip, injuring 3 Palestinians. An earlier incursion into Rafah injured 10 other Palestinians. But still, Egypt was pushing hard to cement the new truce.
We are going to meet them tomorrow. We are going to listen and we are going to discuss and lastly to evaluate and to discuss what are the backgrounds of their movements. Inside the Hamas movement, inside and outside, and lastly we are going to say our decision.
Palestinian Prime Minister Ahmed Kareh would also hold talks on Wednesday with Hamas and the Islamic Jihad for the same purpose. Islamic Jihad leaders said they are ready to meet Kareh. The premier would try to persuade the factions to stop targeting Israelis. But Khalid al-Batash, an Islamic Jihad leader, told Manar channel in a phone call the group wants to set a mechanism for the complete and comprehensive Israeli withdrawal from lands occupied in 1967. The Islamic Jihad suggests also that Kareh does not meet Premier Ariel Sharon until after Israel stops building the separation wall and end the siege of Chairman Yasser Arafat. The Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade, an offshoot of Fatah, rejected any truce. The group said it committed itself to the continuation of the resistance and the struggle against the occupation of all Palestine.
Massive protests denouncing U.S. policies welcomed U.S. President George W. Bush in Britain. The president was meanwhile formally welcomed by Queen Elizabeth II amid tight security at Buckingham Palace in London. Traditional British pomp and ceremony, including a 41-gun salute, took place for the start of the historic 4-day visit, the first by a U.S. president to the United Kingdom. Later on Wednesday, Bush is expected to use an address at the banqueting house in Whitehall to mount an impassioned defense of the invasion of Iraq, the primary reason behind the massive demonstrations in the British capital.
Bush, we do not respect you. We think your policies are not only short-sighted, they are immoral, and the world demands better. George Bush, you are not welcome here. We do not wish to honour you with a state visit.
Overshadowing the pomp and ceremony of the U.S. President George W. Bush's state visit to London, thousands of protesters opposing to the policies of the U.S. administration commenced Tuesday their 3-day anti-war demonstration saga. Bush and his British ally Tony Blair may have hoped the trip would mark their country's so-called victory side by side in Iraq, but increasing attacks on their occupying forces have dulled any sense of celebration, as did the massive street protests awaiting him. Organizers expect up to 100,000 anti-war demonstrators to cap their protest by toppling a giant statue of Bush in central London's Trafalgar Square on Tuesday, an echo of the toppling of a statue of Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein in April.
This president who hears voices must, on Thursday, hear 100,000 British people in full voice saying, "Go home, George Bush, we don't want you here."
Faced with both anti-war protests and a heightened state of alert against a feared attack, police are deploying no less than 5,000 officers at any time during the American president's visit in $8.5 million security clampdown. The Times Daily reported last-minute security fears were the reason for Bush cancelling his only major public appearance in London, dropping plans to meet families of British victims of the September 11, 2001 attacks at a memorial garden outside the U.S. Embassy. Bush is also uncomfortable about plans to meet relatives of British soldiers who died in Iraq, now among the most potent critics of the war.
I was ready to die, to sacrifice for my country, for America, for freedom, the same word they're promoting today. They're still using that same word, and they're hiding behind their real agenda of stealing and robbing and raping and exploiting the people of Iraq.
The first protest was staged in central London just as Bush's presidential jet Air Force One touched down at Heathrow Airport. The Independent Daily said in an editorial that Bush's stay was a travesty of state visit. The trip has come to signify all that has gone wrong with transatlantic relations. The crowds would, under other circumstances, be cheering this country's most stalwart ally, will be marching in protest. The president will move only in a sealed bubble of security, the paper added. It will be a tense and contentious 3 days.
British newspaper The Mirror said Wednesday it had uncovered the biggest royal security scandal ever, manifested in a serious breach of security at the Buckingham Palace, where US President George W. Bush is staying during his state visit to Britain. The newspaper said a reporter for the Daily Mirror tabloid posed undercover for 2 months as a footman at the palace, where he was due to serve breakfast to Bush's top aides Wednesday morning. The journalist Ryan Parry wrote, quote, "Had I been a terrorist intent on assassinating the Queen or American president, I could have done so with absolute ease." Parry said he used bogus references to get a job at the palace while police and royal staff were preparing for Bush's visit, which is being held under unprecedented security. The Mirror devoted 15 pages to the story, illustrated with pictures from inside the palace, with Parry writing such as the shocking incompetence at the heart of the biggest security operation ever in Britain. Buckingham Palace said it had no immediate comment on the report by the Daily Mirror, while London's police said it was extremely concerned by the incident.
Witnesses involved in the procedures are working together now to find out what happened and make sure that can't happen again.
But this time of all times, you'd have thought that everyone working in Buckingham Palace, just like anyone else that has interaction with Buckingham Palace, would have been properly vetted.
Well, obviously, we're extremely concerned by what's happened. As I say, we're all working together at the moment to make sure, to find out what happened and to make sure that can't happen again.
What do you think is the message that this sends out to the Americans, obviously trying to guard their president at this very sensitive time?
Obviously, we're extremely concerned, but the measures put in around the president are very comprehensive, and we've been working very closely with the Secret Service throughout on the particular measures that apply to his visit and his stay here.
American airstrikes in the heart of Baghdad, 3 straight nights of a bombardment around Saddam Hussein's hometown of Tikrit, and a growing use of Israeli-style house demolitions all spell a new get-tough approach by the US military to persistent resistance. But analysts warn that the use of massive firepower in the heart of the Iraqi capital and other heavily populated areas risks alienating the very people whose hearts and minds the coalition professes to want to win.
Amid moves by the U.S. administration to accelerate the transfer of power to Iraqis, U.S. Commander of Western Baghdad, Charles Swanak, said that the U.S. Army was preparing to withdraw from the town of Ramadi before the end of this year. Swanak highlighted the decrease of anti-U.S. attacks and claimed it to be a result of what he called Iraqis tired of daily violence. But on the ground, attacks continue to challenge the occupation. 2 Iraqi policemen and a translator were injured Tuesday night during 2 attacks in the main northern Iraqi city of Mosul. Operation Iron Hammer continues in Baghdad, and for the first time since the March invasion of Iraq, U.S. occupation forces on Tuesday called in air support against targets in central Baghdad and deafened the capital with repeated salvos of aerial cannon fire. Nearly 40 separate rounds were audible across the city. Reporters said the operation appeared centered in the western Baghdad neighborhoods of Mansour, Yarmouk and Qadisiyah. Iraqi police installed checkpoints in Baghdad shortly after Baghdad's bombing. In the northern town of Tikrit, U.S. forces pounded suspected fighters' positions with a series of U.S. mortar rounds, 2 satellite-guided missiles and helicopter downfire and Hellfire missiles for the 3rd consecutive night. It was another show of strength. Meanwhile, U.S. State Department announced that a new UN resolution over the political transfer in Iraq is a possibility. State Department spokesman Adam Early said that such a resolution could be useful at some point. He added that he was not signaling that something imminent was about to happen. For his part, U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell expressed his confidence in the U.S. and British occupation forces, as well as the Iraqi police ability to control the security situation in Iraq. Powell hoped that the UN Secretary General Kofi Annan will soon be able to assign a new special representative in Iraq to play a role in the draft timetable to hand over sovereignty to Iraqis. In Nasiriyah, 131 Portuguese police contingents started to arrive on Monday in the southern city, where a huge explosion ripped through the Italian military police base last week that was to be their initial destination.
President Hosni Mubarak addressed a joint parliamentary session on Wednesday, reviewing his government's domestic and foreign policies and marking the opening of Parliament. We have the details with Nile TV's Nihal Saad.
President Hosni Mubarak stressed that practicing democracy remains his main objective and should prevail in the society as a culture, not merely a political practice. Reviewing a host of domestic and international issues, the President outlined several key issues to be tackled in the new parliamentary session. He asked Parliament to study the amendment of the income tax law and the customs duty. The President also designated the government to draft a legislation with the aim of establishing an independent body to monitor the quality of education. Among other tasks, President Mubarak called on the empowerment of the National Council of Population with the purpose of monitoring the implementation of the National Plan of Population. In his keynote speech, President Mubarak stressed the need to encourage exports, asserting that Egyptian goods now have a competitive edge in the global markets. Yet the president noted there are serious challenges that still lie ahead. Following an abrupt halt to his speech due to a severe flu, President Hosni Mubarak emerged again on the podium to resume his keynote speech, which was broadcast live on Egyptian television. According to remarks by Information Minister Safwat al-Sharif, President Mubarak was suffering from a severe flu accompanied by fever. He was taking antibiotics and fasting for the holy month of Ramadan. In further remarks, Minister of Health Awad Taguddin noted that the president was affected by fever and was taking medication in addition to fasting, and though he needed to rest for several days, he insisted on attending the parliamentary session. President Mubarak, while urging for expanding the scope of political participation, noted that dialogue between parties is vital at this point of democratic progress. Concluding with an optimistic note, President Mubarak said hopes in Middle East peace remain high.
لقد حملتنا الجماهير مسؤولية بناء مستقبل هذا الوطن فحملناها بشرف وإباء. وسنظل بإذن الله قادرين على أن ننتصر لإرادة هذا الوطن وعلى أن ننهض بمستقبله بما يحقق لأجيالنا القادمة طموحات التقدم والتطور والنماء.
Nihal Saad, Nile TV International, Cairo.
And we thank Nihal Saad for that report. Palestinian Prime Minister Ahmed Correa held a round of talks with resistance leaders in the Gaza Strip Wednesday to push for a ceasefire deal with Israel that could revive an American-backed peace plan. A week after winning parliamentary backing for his new cabinet, Correa launched talks with 5 factions, including Hamas and Jihad. Israeli officials say the first summit between Correa and Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon is expected to take place within days. Resistance leaders and Palestinian officials say any ceasefire with Israel would depend on Israel making guarantees to stop attacks on Palestinians, including attempts to kill top activists. Israel had offered on Tuesday to freeze its policy of tracking and killing resistance leaders as long as there was a complete halt to attacks against Israelis. A Latin American tourist who was critically injured in a shooting on Wednesday at the Israeli-Jordanian border died of her injuries shortly afterwards. Israeli authorities said the tourist, who was wounded, had succumbed to her injuries, apparently while being transferred from the hospital in Eilat towards the hospital in Beersheba. 4 other members of the group had also been injured in the attack, which a Jordanian official spokesman said had been carried out by a Jordanian truck driver who was subsequently shot dead by Israeli security guards. The United Nations Security Council voted unanimously on Wednesday for a Russian-drafted resolution backing the stalled Middle East roadmap to settle the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The measure endorses the peace plan formulated by the quartet of advisors on the Middle East: Russia, the United States, the European Union and the United Nations. The statement called on the parties to fulfill their obligations under the roadmap in cooperation with the quartet and to achieve the vision of 2 states. Russian President Vladimir Putin and Jordan's King Abdullah had earlier met in Jordan to discuss the issue. Following their talks, Abdullah said there was no alternative to the roadmap. He added that the latest crisis in Israeli-Palestinian relations was a step backwards, and the international community must not ease up in their efforts. The Jordanian monarch is due to travel to the United States on December 3rd to discuss the Middle East crisis with President Bush. The United Nations on Wednesday condemned Israel's multiple violations of Lebanese airspace, warning that the repeated overflights could escalate tension in the region. The UN office said that the last 2 days had witnessed continuing violations of the Blue Line by Israeli military aircraft. Referring to the line the UN drew to demarcate the border after Israel's withdrawal from South Lebanon in May 2000. It added in a statement that Israel's air violations have persisted despite repeated calls for their cessation by the UN. The United Nations said that on November 17th, 3 air violations involving 4 Israeli aircraft were recorded, with some reports suggesting that some of the planes had flown as far as the city of Tripoli in Lebanon's far north. The statement said on Tuesday 13 Israeli jets were involved in 7 violations, with some aircraft clearly visible as they flew over Beirut and elsewhere, causing sonic booms in certain places.
Donald Rumsfeld concluded his visit to Asia with a tour of American military bases in South Korea, rallying international support for his country's ongoing invasion of Iraq. He tried to lift the morale of his soldiers who were stationed along the tense borders between the 2 Koreas.
This is how Rumsfeld was welcomed in South Korea.
Hey, Rumsfeld! Why did you come here?
And this is how he was received in Japan. Rumsfeld, who understood these messages, tried to save face, at least in front of his soldiers. While embarrassment showed on his face, he went to the American military bases on the tense border between the 2 Koreas to visit the United States soldiers in an attempt to lift their morale. The morale of these soldiers, as well as others stationed in Asia, have been negatively affected since the decision of Rumsfeld and his South Korean counterpart to deploy these forces along the border. This visit concludes Rumsfeld's trip to Asia, which was intended to rally psychological and logistic international support to the American presence in Iraq.
I think that the success story achieved in South Korea 50 years ago, with the support of the United States, will be repeated in Iraq, proving that the U.S. decision to launch a war in Iraq was right.
The question is, what kind of success in Iraq is Rumsfeld talking about?
5 members of the same family were killed when American forces fired on their vehicle in Tikrit city, north of the Iraqi capital of Baghdad. The car was mistakenly hit by a missile fired from a tank, completely destroying the vehicle. 3 bodies were transported to the city morgue, but the bodies of the 2 children who were in the car could not be found. Meanwhile, anti-American forces destroyed train tracks while the train was passing through northern Tikrit, causing the train to derail and turn over. Then one of its carriages was set on fire.
Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which promotes journalism excellence worldwide and invests in the vitality of 26 U.S. communities, and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support is provided by the Firedoll Foundation and Henry and Virgilia Dakin.